Welcome to Beekeeping Today podcast, your source for beekeeping news, information, and entertainment. I'm Jeff Ott.
And I'm Kim Flatham.
Hey, Jeff and Kim. Today's sponsor is Global Patties. They're a family-operated business that manufactures protein supplement patties for honeybees. It's a good time to think about honeybee nutrition. Feeding your hive's protein supplement patties will ensure that they produce strong and healthy colonies by increasing brood production and overall honey flow. Now is a great time to consider what type of patty is right for your area and your honeybees. Global offers a variety of standard patties as well as custom patties to meet your needs. No matter where you are, Global is ready to serve you out of their manufacturing plants in Airdrie, Alberta, and in Butte, Montana, or from distribution depots across the continent. Visit them today at www.globalpatties.com.
Hey, Kim. Welcome to a second season of Beekeeping Today podcast. You ready to start our second year?
Well, I got to tell you, Jeff, I wasn't sure we were going to make it here. But I've had more fun this year than I thought this was going to be, and I'm really looking forward to another one because we've got a lot under our belt. We've got some good plans coming up, and I'm kind of excited about some of the people we're going to be talking to, and I'm kind of excited that we lived through the first one.
Especially glad we made it through the first one, and we can still have friendly conversations off air too.
I think the overriding factor on everything that we've done when it comes down to is technology is great when it works. and we've had some bumps, but boy, I tell you, with you behind the controls there, it's gone pretty smooth, and I haven't lost much sleep over how to make this work better. So
I'm glad you're sleeping better about it. No. It's been great. I've been really enjoying it. So how are your bees going there? On
bees. I've been doing this, I don't know, pushing 40 years, and I got 3 packages this spring,
mm-hmm.
and so far I've had 9 queens for those 3 packages. And I'm not the only one. I've heard a lot of people that are having trouble with queens, and I know it's got to do with weather and queen mating and our weather here. It rained 2 out of 3 days the whole month of June in Northeast Ohio. We got the numbers last night. So what we got wasn't great because of the weather, and once they got here, they got even worse because of the weather. So you just got to sit back and go, well, next year will be better. It's a kind of a farmer thing, and they're all going now, and they're doing okay. But it's the 4th of July. How's yours? You got packages this year, right?
Yeah, I did. One is going gangbusters. I'm really liking it, and it's a joy to have. I mean, it's doing everything it's supposed to do. The other one, the queen hasn't gotten off the 4 frames, and so I'm about ready to. I'm going to requeen her. So it's like. What do you do? It's just the way that this year is playing out, and I'll requeen her, and I doubt that she'll, it'll be a lot of work to get them through the winter. I'm still learning how to get bees through the Pacific Northwest winter. But it's that's why. I mean, I don't want to lose any bees, but that's just the learning experience is part of why I think anybody does it. So I don't know.
Throw the weather into the formula, and then you throw the unknown, and that bees will do what bees will do, and it doesn't make any difference what you do because bees will do.
That's
so. Sometimes you sit back and watch and hope for the best, and you work your tail off and hope for the best, or you watch. So
yeah,
they're going in the right direction. Keep your fingers crossed.
Hopefully, fingers crossed. So today we have your boss, Brad Root, on the show.
Yeah, Brad's back. He's going to talk about the second 50-year history of the AI Root Company. And speaking of bees, which we were doing, that's a big part of what we were doing for the second 50 also. So I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say. I know a lot of what he has to say, but there's some things there in the family that I'm not really keen on or really up with. So it'll be fun to listen to him.
I agree. Hey, so you remember Peter Nelson, our friend of the podcast and guest in episode 22. He's been really busy promoting his movie, The Pollinators, And I was able to get a hold of him the other day, and we talked on the phone about the latest developments and updates of the film festivals and where his movie's been showing. So I got it recorded and wanted to play it now. So let's give it a listen.
Yeah, good.
Hey, I'm on the phone now with Peter Nelson, director and producer of the film The Pollinators. As you may recall, Peter was our guest back in March, episode 22. Hey, Peter, I've been following your film and from your posts on Twitter. Sounds like you've been very busy since we last talked. What's been happening?
Hey, Jeff, thanks for having me back on. Yes,
yeah.
It's been absolutely a really dynamic year for us. On the film level, the Pollinators film is doing really well, and we've been hitting festivals around the country, which has been very gratifying and exciting. Great to meet people. We meet a lot of people from, of course, beekeeping, but also we are striking a chord with gardeners and farmers and of course food people. And so it's been great to kind of have this interaction with all these people, and it's just been so exciting. Well,
it's a great film, and as you mentioned, just the interaction with a broader group than just beekeepers, and it makes me think that I had not heard of or read anything about Jonathan Lundgren before I saw your film, and it's just like, I'm just impressed with what his message, and as you know, we had him on the podcast after your film, so it's I can imagine you're getting a great response to the film.
Yeah, it's been really fun. I have to say, it's kind of as I say to people, it's kind of a tough time for bees, but it's a great time to do a film about them because the awareness of what's going on has been is really touching a nerve, and so many people are interested in it, and it's getting across that some people, that many people are realizing how important the subject is, and it's kind of the important subject that people don't know they really need to know, and that is that's really kind of heartening to see there and be able to bring it out to people. And on a personal level, I had 100% success survival of my bees, which is unusual in the first time in years. I only have 3 hives.
Well, hey,
so it's kind of counter to it's kind of counter to what I'm hearing from a lot of the commercial beekeepers that have just really suffered over the last years, and it's almost more important now than it was a year ago.
Yeah, we're finding that also, and I'm kind of surprised also, and maybe you hear some of this in some of your film festivals, and I'm just starting to pick it up through popular media and everything too, is now there's starting to be kind of a backlash or counter, or a backlash to the honeybee, the quote unquote honeybee crisis, and we've even in the podcast have heard some people talk about that, honeybees, Apis mellifera is not a native bee, so it's taking away food from the native bees, which it's an interesting argument, interesting discussion. I don't know. I think it's like pouring sand down a rat hole. There's no purpose to it, and you get nowhere. And I was wondering, do you hear any of that kind of discussion at the film festivals?
Not a whole lot, but good. I have heard that discussion in other places. I think that people's tendency sometimes they want to make a villain, and if they can't figure out what the villain is, they'll try and find one. And I think that their competition in the landscape is certainly for food and forage is certainly something that is a valid point. But I would say, to that, let's make better forage and landscape, more forage on our landscape, and do more to fix what's out there rather than blame the honeybee for it. I just don't think that's a valid. I don't think that's a valid statement, really. And I also think that it's important for the honeybee. It really is kind of a gateway insect. It's an indicator species, I think, and even though it is a native to the North America, it's a way that people can get interested and become aware about all the other pollinators that are here. And we don't try to say that the honeybee is the be all and end all, so to speak. But it is, it's all our pollinators that we should be concerned about. And I think that we can all do something to make it a better forage and habitat for all bees, native and honeybees.
I agree. And to really mix up metaphors our purpose is that a rising tide lifts all boats. So if we make it better for native bees, we'll make it better for honeybees, and honeybees make it better for honeybees, we'll make it better for native bees.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. One of the responses, and it's been very gratifying for us, is that after we screen at some of these film festivals, I'll get an email from somebody or a text, or somebody will think about the film overnight, go away with the idea, and they come back and they'll send me a note and say, "Hey, I canceled the lawn spray service on my yard," or "I'm looking at the clover and the dandelions in my yard in a much more humane way, and it's not objectionable; it's actually beautiful." And so I think that really is what I hope for, is that we can reframe the argument and not look for a villain, but look about how we see our landscapes and how we approach our food and how we produce our food, and kind of reframe how we look at that and what we can all individually do about it. So it's really gratifying when somebody sends me an email and says, "Yep, canceled my lawn service," and it's which is great, because killing clover and dandelion is great forage for bees, and not just honeybees, it's all of our bees. All over my yard right now, I have all kinds of stuff out there. So I think that kind of stuff can be much more productive than to try and vilify honeybees. And it's really important, I think, for people to remember how dependent our agricultural system is on honeybees, and the dependency upon them and moving them the way our agricultural system is set up is really the takeaway of this, and not to vilify the bees. It's how we're producing our food. That's the real answer.
Yeah. Well, and that's the main message of the movie too. It's the interdependency of everything. So how? Tell me about the film festivals, and what do you have coming up?
Yeah, so I think right after our first festival, Big Sky, was when we spoke to you, and we've since went to Sonoma Film Festival, Newport Beach, and we won a very nice audience award there for environmental films. We've been to San Francisco Doc Fest, and we actually won an award there for excellence in documentary filmmaking. And we went to IFF Boston, which is a great festival. And coming up, we have some really great ones. There's the Woods Hole Film Festival in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, the end of July. Germinate Film Festival, which is a new festival this year, and that's going to be in Ohio, so right in Kim's backyard there. And that's one that's kind of focused on agriculture and agricultural issues, so we're excited about that. And then Middlebury Film Festival, Newburyport, Vancouver is we're going to take it up to Canada, which is great. And Flatirons Film Festival out in Colorado is another one. And Chesapeake, that's another one coming up in October. And then also, what's really exciting is we've signed a distribution agreement with a company called Demand Film. And what's great about them is that they have a different sort of model of theatrical distribution, where they're going to make the film available around the country and also around the world. And we have an agreement with them in England and New Zealand, Australia, Germany, and a couple other countries in Europe. And it's kind of crowdsourced. So people can actually go on the website at Demand Film, and they can request to bring a screening to their town. And Demand has theaters that they work with, and then people, build up a groundswell around them with their beekeeping group or their gardening group or their farm group or whatever. And they can see it on a screen in their own community. And it's kind of an exciting way for us to do the initial phase of distribution of this film, because there are some built-in constituencies with this and audiences with this film. Obviously, beekeepers, but the environmental groups, the agriculture and farming groups, the gardening groups are really coming out strong for it, and just people interested in food.
Well, that's great. And I'll have to check out your website for the Vancouver site. Maybe I can get up there to the festival for that showing.
Yeah, that'd be great. And there are a whole bunch of festivals that we're waiting to find out about going into the fall. And so we still have, I don't know, there are probably a dozen festivals we're still waiting to find out whether we've been accepted or not. There are a few that I know we are, that I can't. I sort of promise not to say anything about yet. So if we were trying to keep the website, which is the Pollinators.net, we're trying to keep that website updated really often, so the latest news will be up there about where it's going to screen. And it's been so fun to go to these festivals and meet people and connect with them in person, and talk about these issues, because it's something that we're finding people are extremely passionate about. And it's showing people, I think, honeybees, and other pollinators, but mostly honeybees, in a new way for many people, and to make them accessible and not a stinging insect, but a really beneficial, important insect to all of us.
Yeah, well, that's really good, and it's definitely needed today. There's so much negative news that just sit there and watch the honeybees, and it kind of gives you some hope and optimism.
It's true, and the other thing about it is that what we found is that people really, I think, leave the film and they get a little bit inspired to do things differently. And whether that's planting a window box, outside their apartment, or doing a community garden, or gardening in their backyard, or just growing much more, much less green lawn, and putting in pollinator-friendly plants. And that's something, that an action that all of us can take, and makes a big difference, not only for honeybees, but again, back to native bees, to create that habitat and forage that is so important for to make it better. And giving people the tools and try to inspire people a little bit was really one of our goals, was to say, okay, great, let's make this actionable, that people can leave these screenings, watch the film, and get inspired to do something about it. And they can do something about it, which is really exciting to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Something within reach of almost everybody. So it's
Yep, exactly right.
Positive thing. Well, Peter, I want to thank you for checking in with us at the podcast, and we wish you the best. And please keep in touch. Maybe I can hook up with you again up in Vancouver. That'd be fun.
That'd be great. And thanks so much again for having me on the first time and then back again. I love what you guys are doing. I always learn something from the show, and it's really good listening.
Well, thanks for the kind words. Well, we'll catch up with you soon. Take care.
Great. Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, it was great to have an update from Peter.
I look forward to talking to him again now that his show is up and on the road, and I enjoyed watching it, and I'm going to go back and watch it again just because it was a good time. Jeff, we've got a real treat today. We've got Brad Root, the president of the AI Root Company, with us again. He's back for his second act. He's going to talk about the second 50 years of the AI Root Company. And Brad, welcome back. It's good to have you here again. How things have been going?
Good, Kim. Thank you. Glad to be here, and appreciate being a part of this second podcast on our second 50. Sort of summarizing our first get-together to go over the first 50. AI starting in 1869, the business that we have today. The beginning of his first bee culture magazine, 1873. The ABC and XYZ of bee cultures, 1877. And just growing the beekeeping business, but on top of that, the honey packaging. So a lot of experimentation, communication, developing products, improving products, and supplying a lot of honey. So that sort of brings us around to the end of the World War I in 1818. And that's the beginning of our second 50. So at that time, we were just acquiring a beekeeping competitor in Council Bluffs, Iowa, and also a beekeeping competitor in San Antonio, Texas. So that was sort of showing the expansion of our business with some more major satellite locations. And a lot of growth had occurred before that in the late 1800s. So the business is continuing to grow and prosper. It's just at about this point in time, AI loses his partner in life, Susan Hall, in 1921 when they were down at their Bradenton home. And they had partnered clear through the beginning of this business and the growth of it, and she was really important to him.
Hey, Brad, you said the Bradenton home. Where's that?
he had the home here in Medina, and he also had a home for wintering down in Bradenton, Florida.
Okay.
And then he had a third place up in the northern part of Michigan. So at different parts of the year, based upon different parts of the weather, is where he would sort of migrate to these. And at each of these locations, he did a lot of gardening and a lot of beekeeping.
Oh, very nice. Thanks.
Yes. So within 2 years after Susan passed away, AI in 1923 was coming back from his Bradenton home, and shortly upon his return, got pneumonia and soon passed after that. So shortly into our second 50 years, we sort of lose the founder of the company, but he had really created a strong bedrock. His two sons, Ernest, his oldest, and Huber, his youngest, had both gone to Oberlin College here locally, studying in different things, and had joined the business along with his oldest daughter, Maud's husband, J.T. Calvert. So Ernest and J.T. Calvert were the next to sort of carry on the banner for the company and the direction for the company. And a lot of what Ernest focused on was the beekeeping side of the business, and continuing to perpetuate that. Huber, the younger son, was a very inventive individual, so he did a lot of the tweaking and developing of products and thinking of all sorts of new and different things. But Ernest was out there to continue to promote the beekeeping aspect of our business. And he actually traveled around the country with a sort of a traveling circus at the time called Red Path Chautauqua. And my grandfather, who was born in 1905, when he was a teenager, would also travel along with the Red Path Chautauqua and worked with the crews that would put up the tents and take down the tents and such. So it was a real grand experience for him, but it was a part of going around and promoting from community to community about beekeeping, the bee beards and how workable bees were and how beneficial they were to our agriculture, and something for people to consider doing as a pastime or a business.
Did they travel with their own bees, or did they borrow bees from the local beekeepers?
I don't really know. I never really asked my grandfather about that. I would imagine that there was some bees that they probably did travel with, but not a whole lot. But I would imagine that it's easier to do a bee beard with bees that you're familiar with. So they probably did travel with some bees, but not a lot of bees, just to make sure that they had some in case they came to a community where there was a beekeeper that might not. But
Wow.
the whole point of this was to promote and educate.
And this was what, about the 30s? You were saying?
So Ernest was probably doing this before AI passed away, as he was involved in the business, and then definitely afterwards. That was his part of continuing to grow the business and grow awareness of the product. And he had also taken over being the editor or the publisher for the Bee Culture magazine. So where AI was involved in every single magazine during his lifetime, it was then left with Ernest and the editors of the magazine to carry on that part of the communication and education and basically the magazine and definitely the ABC and XYZ of bee culture. So that was definitely a focus of Ernest's part of the business. JT, his brother-in-law, was then more focused on the financial aspect of the business and the operational and the organizational part of it. And as I mentioned, AI's younger son, Huber, was an organic chemist. So he worked with the beeswax and products, but was a very inventive, tinkering individual. So from about the 1920s to the 1940s was Ernest's time in leading the company. As the 1940s came around, is when Huber started to be more the focus in driving the business. A big change that occurred a few years after Ernest started running the business was the honey packaging was the largest part of the business, and we had a hard time financially coming out of World War One because we had bought a lot of futures in honey and supplying the armies of Europe and such. And when the war ended, contracts got canceled with us, but we still had contracts for purchasing the honey. And prices had dropped, and so we were in a real financial bind. So at the very end of the 1920s, we sold our entire honey packaging business to a company called Honey and Preserves, and they took our airline brand of honey that was in Pullman railroad cars and high-end hotels and such, and they took that part of the business over. So suddenly, at the end of the 1920s, a large chunk of our business was sold off, and it was left with Huber to try and decide what next would the company evolve into. It was doing beekeeping supplies. It was still involved in that, still publishing the monthly bee culture magazine, the ABC, XYZ every few years. But they needed something else to continue to grow the business and evolve the business.
Brad, you must have had a lot of empty rooms in that factory over there.
Well, we did, and it was actually the entire north side of the Liberty Street. So what we might have known as the old candle production area was, before 1929, was the whole honey packaging. So you had people wearing white jackets, white hats, gloves, all the sanitary things that you need with food processing.
This is just a little bit of stretch away from where you're going, but how did the city of Medina look at that? I mean, suddenly there was a lot of people that weren't working anymore, and a lot of commerce that wasn't being carried out. Did that affect Medina significantly? Do you know?
Well, it probably did, but it was coinciding with the Great Depression, the stock market crash.
Yeah.
So it probably got lost in all of that. Not to say it didn't affect the company, but a number of the elders, like my grandfather when I started, and Virginia Waltz, who had been here a long time as traffic manager, they came from that Depression era, and they would salvage everything that they could possibly salvage and make do with what they could make do with. And it was an entire mindset. It affected an entire generation very strongly. But I never really heard of any discontent in the community, just because everybody was hungry and looking for a meal.
One of the things that's our listeners may have heard about, we're doing some background studies on a lady named Susan Cole, who worked for the Root Company her entire life. And she wrote an autobiography, and she barely mentions this event in her book because she was in the publishing end of it, which didn't slow down one bit. They continued every month. They had to have a magazine out. So the honey part of it was, for at least some people in the company, not a major event. But I got to believe for everybody that was in the honey business, and even part of Medina, it must have been a real wake-up call.
Yeah, and from the standpoint of the shipments going out and things like that, yeah, that would have been fairly noticeable. And the town was, for a long time, considered the sweetest town in the United States,
well, I think it's
probably
still
the world. But that was probably because of all that honey packaging and all the honeybees that were used to support that process.
So you've got a factory full of empty rooms. What happened?
So Huber, he set aside half of his time to think about different things to get involved in. Of all the ideas that he had churning around in his head and experimentation he'd done. And about that time, he was playing tennis with a local priest and from Valley City, and the priest approached him with a problem they were having in the church, that their candles didn't seem to them to have the beeswax content that the Catholic Church required, which had to have been more than 51% back in those days, probably closer to 67%. And so Huber, as an organic chemist that had worked many, many years with beeswax, analyzed the candles and found that some of the candles had a little bit of beeswax, but many of the candles had absolutely no beeswax in them. So at that point, the church asked if we would consider starting to make altar candles and the candles that the church needed. And so Huber began to experiment with waxes and string and asked them if they could locate wicks that could be used. And again, that sort of experimentation that AI went through, trying to improve on the ideas that Langstroth had, was suddenly going again in the company with Huber, experimenting and playing around. One of the products that he made was an altar candle. So he would take a sheet of wax, foundation wax, that was meant to be in a beehive, used in a beehive, and he would put a piece of string at one end and roll the candle up, and that was his first altar candle. Later, he found that if he used the wax after sheeting, where it's put into a thick sheet of wax, but after it's been smooth rolled, which ran it through ringers to make it a very thin wax that you could almost see through, but before the honeycomb was put into the wax, if he used that sheeted, smooth rolled wax along with the string, he could make a much better burning candle. So taking sort of those air holes out of the rolled candle improved its performance. So that was the beginning of altar candles. Then they had to roll really large candles to make Paschal candles for churches. The next product that he developed was a replacement for their sanctuary lights. They would have a dish with oil in it, and that would be lit, and that was very messy. And so he took a hurricane globe from a street lamp and put a cork in the bottom of it, ran a string up through it, and poured liquid wax into it. And in 1930, that became the first bottled light. And that, from that point on, a bottled sanctuary light or a bottled devotion light was the way that the church was used to either pay tribute to God or follow through on someone's prayer. So those were products that he developed, but he started with that hurricane globe. He then took a milk bottle and finally ended up designing a very specific bottle that he found wouldn't create a lot of wind movement inside the product and create a bunch of soot when burning, and would consume itself very smoothly down to the end. So that's what Huber was doing in the very last years of the 1920s and the beginning of the 1930s.
I got to ask the obvious question here, Brad. Well, obvious to me anyway, is that at the same time the Root Company is making beeswax foundation.
Yes.
They are obtaining beeswax from, I'm going to guess, their customers.
Yes.
On a fairly regular basis. But suddenly the demand for that wax is increasing. And what was the situation in availability of beeswax just to meet that demand?
Because we had the magazine as sort of even today, it provides a very good connection to an entire industry of beekeepers that are out there.
Oh, yeah.
So that was probably very beneficial to the process. For us, for many years, we've used beeswax from Sue Bee Honey. So large honey packaging organizations is where today you could find a lot of sources, but also there's a lot of other large commercial beekeeping operations that can provide us and even our competitors in other industries with beeswax.
So you were saying that so Huber came out with the original idea of putting the wax and the wick and everything into a jar and selling it. He commercialized that. So everywhere you go to Walmart, wherever, and even if it's not an AI root candle, that really originated there in Medina.
Well, and that could be sort of a runoff of that, but his was definitely the bottled devotion light and sanctuary light. It was just plain wax meant to burn 7 days to remember the prayer. And nowadays in the decorative and home care industry, the most popular candles that are out there that are fragranced are the ones that are in jars.
Yeah.
Just because for those consumers, it's an easy way to use and less mess than cleaning up a votive out of a votive cup.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, very cool. Interesting.
So, so by the 1930s, Huber was becoming the president of the company, taking over from Ernest, who was getting older and wanted to sort of step back a bit from the business. So from the 1930s to the 1940s, a lot of what Huber did was develop a sales force to sell the religious candles to churches and predominantly the Catholic Church. So that's what Huber was doing from the 30s to the 40s. By the early 1950s, my dad was in college and started and by the middle of the 1950s was coming out of college and going into the Air Force. But my grandfather, who was born in 1905 and traveled with his father with the Red Pass Chautauqua, was becoming an adult about the time of the Depression. And so he was helping Huber run the business. So it was mostly Huber and Allen from the 30s, 40s, and well into the 50s.
Allen was your grandfather.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. So Ernest's son. And so once John got out of the Air Force, he ended up joining the business, got into the advertising side of the business, working closely with bee culture and the beekeeping aspect of the business, and starting to learn the business sort of from the ground up as each generation would. And about the middle of the 1950s is when Ernest passed away. And soon after that, J.T. Calvert. So now it was solidly coming into the third generation by the end of the 1950s to carry on the mantle of the business and drive the continued direction. So we're a strong beekeeping supply business. At that time, into religious candles, a good foothold in that area. And as we came into the 1960s, about the middle of the 1960s is when somebody asked us to add fragrance and color to the votive candles that we made for the church. And so our Texas location was the one that was approached for that. They did that, and that made a consumer candle. And that sort of rang bells for them that maybe if they made a pillar candle, some taper candles, opened up a showroom in the Dallas Merchandise Mart, and started to develop a sales force, they could make home candles. So by the middle to late 1960s, we were beginning to expand into another direction, but it was another sort of evolution of just tweaking what we already did and expanding our business in another direction.
You had to be thinking three different ways. You get up in the morning, if you're running this company, you're thinking a home consumer market, looking at smelly, pretty candles. You're thinking of the devout Catholic Church market, want beeswax candles that meet their specifications, and then you've got beekeepers who want good stuff at not a lot of money, and it had to be a real chaotic time for the guy sitting at the top of the pile right then.
Well, and it probably was, but the nice part of a family business through the years is there's a lot of families that are involved in that business, and a lot of people putting their darndest effort at trying to make the best products. And through my involvement in the business, it's always come down to making an absolutely quality product and constantly looking at ways to improve the product, and then people will buy the product. For AI, even for his gleanings in bee culture, inevitably he was just trying to answer people's questions, but he made a darn good product, and people subscribed to it and read it and contributed to it. And here we are 150 years later, and the magazine's still going.
One of the I think probably the most interesting comment I get yet today when I go to a meeting and I meet a beekeeper who's been at it even longer than I have here, who remembers being able to buy root products at a local bee supply store.
Yes.
He says the word that comes out of root woodenware back then was furniture.
Mm-hmm.
It was as good as you could get. The other stuff worked, but root woodenware was furniture. And I've been listening to that for 30 years, so it must be true. And I've got some of that old stuff, and it is.
It's amazing. I remember that was my first exposure to beekeeping equipment was the AI root equipment. And I got spoiled on that. And later in life, when I was trying to find other, just comparing notes, and I did, Kim, the first article for you on woodenware, comparing all the different manufacturers and makes of all the beekeeping equipment. AI root came on top all the time is the most consistently within dimension and finely finished, and it was furniture. It was really nice. You don't find it today. Probably couldn't afford it today.
Yeah, well, there's that. So that brings us into the late 60s or so?
Yes.
Okay.
So and even during those times, we went through another World War in World War II. Alan Root, my grandfather, had to work hard to make sure that he could get an allotment of wood that would be used towards the making of beehives because of the importance in beehives in agriculture and such. But at the same time, we had to do what we needed to do to help the government as part of the war effort. So we made ammunition crates. We made splints, arm splints and leg splints. So there was things that you had, in order to get an allocation of resources, you had to have something that was benefiting the war effort, but yet he also made a good, strong argument, and it was heard that beekeeping was important to the war effort too. At other times, we were making educational toys, so that was something that my grandfather evolved into, was going to toy fairs and using our woodworking operation to make completely wooden, not a piece of plastic or metal in them, but educational toys. So you could put a truck together. So it made the axle, it made the wheels, it had the nuts for the wheels, and all parts of it, and how it was already painted and colored. Educational letters from A through Z so that kids could learn their alphabet and such. So that was another part of the business that went on during the wartime. We had to sort of throttle off on it during the war, but it sort of ebbed and flowed in between those points. But it was just another part of the business that sort of came and went.
There were things going on during the war also that the Root Company was a part of. I know they campaigned along with other beekeeping companies to make sure beekeepers could get sugar. You need bees to make wax. You need bees to pollinate for crops. And that if that's the case, then you need to feed bees. And if I recall reading, the government said, yes, we agree that's correct, but we don't want you to take that sugar and then sell it to regular citizens for a profit. We'll dye it blue. Do I have that correct? Do I have that memory correct? I remember reading that what beekeepers were able to get was blue sugar, but it was a result. They were able to get it, and it was a result of a lot of the hard campaigning that the Root Company and others did during the war to make sure that beekeepers could stay afloat. There was a lot of, of course, if beekeepers went out of business, the Root Company and all the rest of them would lose customers. So it was in their best interest to keep beekeepers in business.
Right.
So it was.
I hadn't heard. I've heard about blue water, but never blue sugar.
I may have the color wrong, but I know there was a lot of campaigning in Washington, and I want to say Ellen was a part of that. Going to several times to make sure that beekeepers were able to get the resources they needed to stay in business, to keep the government in business during the war.
He did travel a lot to Washington during the war years. Yep.
Was there a part of the Root Company providing beeswax to the military for? I suppose they used it as a sealant and ammunitions.
Not that I've heard. We've made through the years 100% beeswax cylinders and cakes and things that could be used in sewing and all sorts of different things. And there's other machining industries that do look for that sort of 100% beeswax. But it's not a strong product for us today. But it probably was something where you're taking unrefined crude beeswax and refining it to make a pure beeswax. I know that like dentists would use beeswax as part of processes that they go through and stuff. There's the making of airplane blades and such uses waxes, which beeswax is too pricey, so they tend to use things like paraffin waxes and such for that nowadays. But I'm sure beeswax has been used in a variety of different things. Even cartons today are more paraffin wax coated than beeswax coated.
So the company's doing a good job of making church candles. They're still making beekeeping equipment like mad, trying to keep up. That brings us up into the 70s, and there's a whole culture there that took off on beekeeping for not a terribly long time, but you must have done well with that group. I say this carefully, the hippies and the communes, all of those things. Beekeeping was an integral part of self-sustainability in that era.
Well, we're sort of seeing a return to that without the hippie. But people want to know where their food's coming from, right, and less willing to take what's already processed and not knowing how it was processed and what's processed in it. So what comes around comes around.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, then you get into the early 80s, and that's probably just about the start of the third 50 here, but that's when your home decorative candle market really kind of exploded, wasn't it, right about then?
Yeah, it would start to grow by the beginning of the 1980s. So that's definitely at the beginning of our third 50 years. Was the 1970s and 1980s where that was growing. It started in San Antonio, where they approached us on the adding of the fragrance and dye of the votives. And so that was really the focal point of that growth, was in San Antonio. It then moved to our Council Bluffs facility after that, and then ultimately, finally, to Medina. A manager that had worked for us for a long time down in Texas came up to Ohio at the beginning of the 1980s and really started to grow the business from the standpoint at this facility. That will probably be the focal point of the third 50 years, is the growth of the decorative business, the home candles, along with the continued growth of the church candles. But the getting out of the beekeeping supply business and continuing with that great magazine.
Well, good to hear you say that. And that's when I came onto the scene. Pretty much it was the early to mid '80s, and it looks like that's where we will pick this up next time. Brad, I got a quick question for you. In October this year, we're having Bee Culture Magazine's event. It's going to be October 11th, 12th, and 13th, and it's going to be right here in Medina. And we're celebrating the history of American beekeeping. Certainly, the history of the Root Company is a big part of that, but we're also going to have as guests, we've got AI Root coming, CP Dadant, LL Langstroth, a few other people that are going to be able to make contributions. I really hope you're going to be there to enjoy part of that and maybe even make some contributions to the history of the Root Company.
I look forward to that, and I look forward to meeting all those wonderful individuals.
I think it should be fun. Well, Brad, what else? Writing up the second 50.
I think we've covered it very well today. It was really the change of the mantle from AI to the second generation and getting into the third generation and the developing of the candle side of the business.
Well, I got to tell you, it's been fun to watch, sitting here listening to you tell this from your perspective. I've, of course, read a lot of what goes on here, but to hear it out loud from somebody that firsthand view has been a lot of fun. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
We look forward to you coming back again towards the end of the year, and we'll finish up the last 50.
I look forward to it.
Next 50.
The next 50,
the next
yeah.
50.
The next 50.
It's an unending story.
And absolutely.
Well, that's good.
Good. All right.
Good thing.
Well, thank you, Brad. Jeff?
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. Look forward to having you back to talk about the next 50 years of the AI Root Company. Well, that was pretty good, Kim.
Well, Jeff, I guess now we've heard the first 100 years of the Root Company, listening to Brad. And right now we're stepping on to the day I came on board. I started here in '86, and that's just about where he left off. So I've watched the very end of the beekeeping part of the business unfold and go away. Of course, the publications department hasn't changed any, but the candle market has really exploded, the decorative candle market especially, and smelly, pretty candles isn't something that I would have ever thought I'd be a part of. But
Wait, Kim, I don't think you're supposed to say smelly candles. You're supposed to say fragrant. Maybe that's why they keep you in the bee publications.
But they've done them well, and one of the things that Brad really noted was a quality product, and coming out of the Root Company, the candles that they make really are top shelf.
Yeah.
So that has excelled. It does not surprise me.
When I was there in June, and you gave me the tour of the candle making area of the Root Company there, it was pretty amazing. You don't think about all the effort and work that goes into the making of candles. But to see the manufacturing process, it's involved and it's impressive.
The secrets are in the details, and the science is in the details, and the success is in the details. The wicks that we use, and the wax blends that they use, and the fragrances where they get them, and all of it now. Everything that they do in that factory is now. The first word is it sustainable? So we've really cut back or quit using things that aren't. So not only is it a good product, it's a good product that isn't harming anybody or anything. So it's fun to watch. Yeah,
people smile when they see a candle. So I think it's a good thing.
So other than that, like I said, the first 100 years, next time we see Brad, we'll have the next 100, or at least the next 50 years coming up. And I look forward to listening to that too.
Yep, I do too. Well, that about wraps up this show. Hey, before we go, I want to encourage our listeners to rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, wherever you download or stream the show. Your vote helps other beekeepers find us quicker. Hey, Kim, did you know if you had an iPhone, you could ask Siri to find and play Beekeeping Today podcast? It goes something like this. Hey, Siri, play Beekeeping Today podcast.
Now playing Beekeeping Today podcast.
2,
that these guys
See?
work with.
Sound familiar?
Well, yes, it does, because that's how I do it.
Fantastic.
Because I can't find it any. No. It makes it easy and fast. And when I'm in the car, of course, my phone comes on the car radio. So all I have to do is make sure the phone's on and do what you just did, and there it is. So it's fast, it's easy, and it works well.
Yeah, you're right. It is fun, and it impresses your friends and neighbors. Also, we want to thank this week's sponsor, Global Patties. Check them out at www.globalpatties.com. And while you're there, give them a shout out for sponsoring this great program with Brad Root, from the president of AI Root Company. And finally, we want to thank you, the Beekeeping Today podcast listener, for joining us on this kickoff show, or the season 2. Feel free to send us your comments and questions at beekeepingtodaypodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you. Anything else, Kim?
I think that wraps it up for the first one of year 2, Jeff. Thanks.
It'll be fun. It'll be a good second year. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.